Hello. I wanted to invite you to talk about the concept of the law of attraction and the single most important thing in order to be able to achieve the law of attraction. And so you may have heard this before, but I hope that I can explain this in such a way where it becomes crystal clear. So most of the time you'll hear things such as gratitude practice. That gratitude is important. And most of the time people don't understand why gratitude is so important when it comes to the law of attraction. And so here's the reason why. So gratitude. What is gratitude? Gratitude, we understand gratitude as something that we're grateful about. But really, what does it mean? Actually, it's an inventory. It's an inventory of all the things that we have. So if you think about, if you're going to do whatever it is you're going to do, you have to mind your resources. And so now, think about this. You take an inventory of all your resources. So you take an inventory of all your resources. And let's say, for instance, you don't appreciate your resources and you go, what's the use of all those things that I have? Not a single thing is actually useful. And you don't appreciate it, what do you think would happen? Let's say, for instance, you think that 90% of your resources are useless. Can you utilize any of it? Of course not. How can you do anything? And so, let's say, for instance, a farmer, is complaining about the soil, and is complaining about the weather, and is complaining about the seeds, and is complaining about actually his equipment. What kind of results do you think the farmer is going to get? And let's say, for instance, whatever is in your life, if you don't appreciate the resources in your own life, what kind of results do you think you'll be able to get? And how much do you think you're going to be able to utilize that? And so that's just one part of it. So the first portion is actually being able to take inventory. Now, once you take the inventory, something very interesting happens. If you know everything you've got, and you feel gratitude, meaning that you're grateful that you have it, that positive energy allows, have you ever noticed that the things that you appreciate the most, you use more? If you think something is great and it's useful, you tend to make more use of it. The better you think about it, the more you use it. And so, if you are grateful for something, you can take that inventory and you can build on it. And this is where the magic is. So when you build on it, things start happening that's beyond what you think is possible. You do simple things. So the first thing is that you have an inventory, and when you appreciate what you have, then all of a sudden you can fully utilize it. And being grateful is the only way you can fully utilize it. Now, once you start utilizing what you have, it starts taking a life on its own, and you start building on it. Now, here's the interesting thing about this whole thing. In order for us to achieve what we want to achieve, we need to know what we want. For most people, what you want is hypothetical. So now I said that gratitude is the most important thing, but when you know what you have, something very interesting happens, which is you actually know what you want. Here's a little secret to life. Whatever you have, you've been collecting. Because whether you know it or not, that's what you wanted. And oftentimes this is a threatening idea for a lot of people, because like, oh, you mean to say that these things that I don't want in my life are actually something I wanted? Actually, I like to say it's a reflection of what you want. Sometimes we don't want certain things, and so we try and not have them, and because of that, ironically, we have them. Let's say, for instance, if you don't want to want people to gossip about you, and like you're really concerned, or you don't want people to judge you. Have you ever noticed that for some reason, like there seems to be a lot more gossip or judgment about you, and it's kind of like the same thing. And so, whatever we don't want or whatever we want is a reflection of what we want, and we start actually collecting that, and our life becomes a reflection. Now the only difference is going to be either if you've been doing the principles correctly, your life is going to reflect what you want, or your life is going to reflect what you don't want. And for most people, it's a collection of both. It's a mix. But what you don't want, because it reflects what you want, I'm just going to say it reflects what you want. So unless you look at your inventory, you're not really going to have a good idea as to what you want, and what you think you want is going to be hypothetical. So a great example of this would be basically looking at someone who says, like, this is actually one of the most common things I actually get, is, Master Kim, I want to have a great relationship. And so I don't want the drama, or I don't want like these conflicts. Why do they occur? It's really, really interesting because if you want a great relationship, so what you want is a great relationship. Now, if I were to say, take an inventory, it's like, hey, do you have great relationships? Like, if you, like, okay, what are you grateful for? It's kind of interesting. And people start taking inventory. Oftentimes, they're not actually grateful for their relationships. But when they start taking inventory, it's like, well, okay, you're having this conflict with this person, but why are you having this conflict? It's like, well, I guess it's because, you know, my mother or my father cares about me, and because they care, they're concerned, and so they want me to look at this thing, and I don't want to look at this, and I feel like they're bothering me. And so it's kind of interesting, but I guess I am actually grateful that they care enough to challenge me on these things, even though I find it so painful. And it's interesting, what they find out is that they actually have the kind of relationship they want, because if they were conscious, they would realize that they want the kind of relationship where people are honest, where the people care about them, and then people would tell them the kind of things that they don't want to hear, but they need to hear, and that they're courageous enough to tell them instead of just letting it go by. And it's interesting, consciously we say that we want these things, but when the actual conflict comes, because we're not looking at what we have, we look at what we don't have, or what we don't want. No one wants conflict, right? No one wants conflict, but we all want great relationships. We all want people that care about us. And you know what's really interesting is that people that care about you, like, are all around us. We just don't see it because of the conflict, because we look at what we don't want. And so when you try and resist the conflict, then your entire life fills up with conflict. It's a very interesting thing, right? And so all of a sudden your life is filled with what you don't want, but it's actually a reflection of what you do want, because if you care about relationships, you're going to actually have a lot of people that care about you, because at some point you will have expressed care because you care about it. So you attract relationships to you. It's just that at some point you're going to start having conflict, because all relationships do. And so this is a good example. So if you start taking inventory, you start realizing that all the conflicts that you have is because you want great relationships. And all of a sudden you start having clarity about it, and you're like, oh. And then something interesting happens. Oh, I want to be able to do conflict better. But that's not where you started. So gratitude actually leads you to this interesting realization that the very thing you thought you didn't want oftentimes becomes the very thing you want. And this, what you want, takes you onto a whole new trajectory that allows you to build. And all of a sudden now, you're able to build upon what you want better, and your resources start increasing. And so gratitude allows you to take inventory. And as you take inventory, it actually shows you what you really want, and through actually what you don't want, because you need to take inventory of that as well. And as that happens, you get to start seeing how to build on your life, on what you really want. And so if you look at the 3 things that you need to really create a successful life and to start attracting the things that you really want, you need actually to have clarity of what you want. You need to be able to take action on it or decide on it. Take action or make decisions on it. Decision is an interesting thing. If you don't make it, it happens anyways. And so what I mean by it is that people say, I'm not going to decide. But you know, all decisions have a timeline. They have a deadline. So when the time comes, whether you care it or not, you actually, the decision's made for you, right? Has it ever happened to you? I mean, like, well, it's actually happened to you all the time where you're then not making a decision on it, and the time comes, and then you actually, the decision just made for you. So those are the kind of things that happen all the time. Let's say, for instance, there's a school trip coming, and you don't, hand in the application or the fee. When the time comes, well, you don't get to go, and maybe you wanted to have gone later, but it doesn't really matter. So to not make a decision is actually a decision itself. So decision is an interesting thing, but not making a decision has consequences, and that is that your mind or your unconscious becomes bogged down with it, and it becomes heavier and heavier and heavier. Most of the time, the reason we don't make decisions is because we don't want to make bad decisions. We don't want to make mistakes. Now, isn't this interesting? When we don't want to make mistakes, then these decisions pile up, and trying to make decisions becomes more and more heavier. So let's say, for instance, you say, I don't want to make a decision because I don't want to make this bad decision. If I do this, I may have this consequence. So now this decision is hanging on you, but you do want to do it, but you're not doing it. And then another decision comes, and then another decision comes, and then all of a sudden you have like 10, 20, 30 decisions hanging over you. And you freeze, and you can't do anything. And your life stops moving forward. Isn't it interesting? But if you make a decision, then something interesting happens. You actually can course correct. How often has it been that you just make a decision and you realize, oh, that's a wrong decision, and then you course correct? So making a decision immediately is actually the better choice. It's a lot safer to make a decision than not make a decision, because you get to course correct, and when you make a decision, you stay empty. So your mind is clear. If you make a decision, you would have noticed that you feel better. So if you have clarity of what you want, and oftentimes we don't have clarity because of consequences, like you say, oh, if I want this, it's not realistic. And what is realistic or not has nothing to do with what you want. And I'll come to this later, that secret of what you want, and why it's so important. And then when you do know what you want, oftentimes we don't make a decision, so nothing happens. And then the third portion that you need is actually gratitude. That's actually where I wanted to start with, because whatever decisions you make is based upon this. So as I said, if you're actually grateful, then it fires up what you want, and you know what you can do within what your means are. Because that's actually all we can do within our means. Now, if you start taking the action that we can, something miraculous happens. It starts a chain reaction, and help that we didn't even anticipate comes in our direction. Like you say, oh, I've been trying to fix my house, and I don't have this tool, but I don't have enough money, so I wanted to buy it, but I couldn't buy it, so I'm saving up. So you're saving up, you're taking action. And someone says, oh, I got the tool, let me loan it to you. Or they'll say, I know someone else who actually has this tool. So all of a sudden, the universe starts answering, and it starts coming in your direction. But it doesn't happen without taking action, because no one knows. You need to send out the signal. You talking about it is a signal. And so if you actually have inventory of what you have, so like say for instance, you need to know what tools you have, you don't, you need to know what is broken, you need to know what you can save. That's all inventory. And if you're grateful that you can save, then you'll save. If you're not grateful, then you won't. And if you took an inventory, then you'd also know that you want to fix your house. Do you see how this goes? So these actually loop onto each other. So then, how do you effectively do a gratitude practice? This is actually one of the most common questions I get asked, simply because people say, I try and do the gratitude practice, but I just don't feel anything. If I do it, I just don't really feel the gratitude, and it doesn't really hit me. Now, here is actually the important thing that you need to know about a gratitude practice. Gratitude practice only works if there's enough context and specificity and impact. You need these three things together. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. So let's say, for instance, if you say, oh, I'm grateful for my friends, you might feel like, But if you say, I am grateful about so-and-so, because this person always responds to me when I'm in need. Can you see how specific it is? Or if you're like, I'm so grateful for this person because the other day when I was having a whatever, this person did this for me. Can you see how just as I'm talking, as I'm becoming more and more specific, you start feeling, and you start filling in the blanks, and you start feeling the gratitude yourself, or you can see how it's going to work. So look at how I said this last sentence. The other day, when I was, that's a context. And then you became really specific. When I was suffering, that person did this, the impact. So unless you actually feel the impact of whatever it is that you have, it's actually useless. I've heard people say, I'm grateful for the sunshine, I'm grateful for the air, and they just rattle it off, and I could tell that it's not having any impact. And I said, because I'm a Taoist practitioner, air means a lot to me, because we have breathing practices. So when I say I'm grateful for air, I really mean it, because my breathing practice the air makes a huge difference. I feel the difference in the quality. It makes a difference in how I feel. But for this person, I was like, well, if I didn't breathe, I'd die. And it was kind of like conceptual. It didn't really hit it. And so I'd like to say that whatever it is that you're going for, it needs to really impact you. And so some of the things that we say, we should be grateful for. There's a lot of should be things. Well, I have a good enough job. I have a great family, and people like list all the things they should be grateful for, and like it's not having an impact. Like if you were to say, I don't like the job that I have, but if I think about losing it, I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to be fired. And it's providing for me. It's allowing me to do what I need to do. It's paying for my bills. And actually, I'm grateful for that. And if I consider it, it's not so bad, actually. It's air conditioned. It pays for me. I get paid decently enough. And so on. So do you see how specific it becomes? And so there's a certain level of honesty that you need, where within a context where it's specific and you can see the real impact on you. When you start doing it like this, not only do you start feeling gratitude, but you start taking real inventory. And all of a sudden, because you're starting to think in terms of context and like really specific impact, you start making better decisions. And so, isn't it interesting? Look at this gratitude practice. This one gratitude practice actually tightens what you want, because impact determines what you want. Because really, or another way to say this is consequence. So another word for impact is consequence. So, from the consequences, the kind of consequences, we know what kind of consequences we don't want, and we know what kind of consequences we do want. We know what kind of impact we want to receive, or what kind of impact we want to have. So it's all about consequences. And so that determines what we want. The specificity and the context allows us to make better decisions. And that allows us to feel gratitude. So can you see that this way of thinking actually holds all three? So this is a secret to the simple way of looking at things. Being able to look at the context, specificity, and impact until you feel gratitude allows you to know what you want and allows you to know what kind of decisions you want to make. And this is the secret to gratitude practice. Hopefully, you'll be able to use this and create the kind of life you want. And hopefully I was able to answer some of the questions that you had about the law of attraction. Thank you.